This is sort of a momentous video. I did a lot of stuff off camera because it was very tedious and hard to film. But I added the control cables, and those just went in. Those little pegs that stick down I just made out of wood. And then I rigged everybody in through the right parts, looking at the plans to see what goes where, which rudder or elevator things go to. You just got to look carefully at pictures of the real airplane and or the plans. The plans are pretty clear as to where these things go. Like that one on the top is the upper elevator, for example. Goes underneath and then up out the top. And then you can see I put the control cables, completely rigged them so that they're all together. Then I rigged the stabilizer. And I also put in, you can see the little inverted V's in there on the top, and that made the tails much more rigid. Now the problem was and you'll see this when you look carefully as you're looking at this. I start to pan this around. You can see how crooked, how twisted the rear section of the fuselage is on the top, especially. You can tell. This all looks fine. But in order to make those, the inverted V's look good under there, I had to actually put them farther apart than they're supposed to be. You can see how crooked that is there. They're supposed to come down the center of the underside of the upper stabilizer, but that wasn't going to work because everything was so far off that it would end up being off center. So I'd actually put them out wider than they're supposed to be. No one will notice, but that is incorrect. But it's the only way I could get it to look half decent. But rigging those, I didn't show that because rigging is rigging. It's just a lot of very careful measuring. This is done again with elastic thread and super glue. And you can see that everything is rigged the way it's supposed to be. I've got plenty of little wires and things in there. It's just like rigging a biplane. Exactly the same. It's just as a little stabilizer. But it's very convincing. It's all together. Excuse me. It looks really nice and very complicated looking. It wasn't hard to do. Just take one thing at a time. If you take one piece at a time, it is not a difficult job. And if you use elastic thread, if you were doing this with fishing line or invisible mending thread or whatever, like a lot of folks do, I think you'd go into the loony bin. But elastic thread makes things easy, and it's surprisingly much stronger. So I'm very pleased how this looks. This is super awesome. That was a headache I was worried about. Turned out very well with a little dinking around. So then I start working on these nacelles. Make sure there's some instruments there and make sure that strut is the right way. The nacelles are not glued in place. I'm just using them to guide my struts in. Other side, same thing. Make sure that those instruments are going facing inward towards the cockpit so they can look out and see the instruments. And they're going to go into those holes. I've already checked them previously, a long time ago, to make sure it looked pretty good. So after test fitting these, I decided, again, the nacelles themselves are not glued in yet. They're just helping hold these things at approximately the right spacing. And once everything gets solid and stuff, and I'll even rig part of these struts, then I can put on the top wing. Then I can play around with the nacelle, or maybe even once these are on, I can move the nacelles in the right position. The nacelles are not load bearing. They're just for looks, really. They're to hold the propellers. So I'm putting each of these, although you can't see, into each hole. They fit very well. The other side was a little bit more difficult, but these fit right into those holes. And all I'm doing is pushing them down individually, not worrying about the nacelle. All I'm trying to do is get these struts to be straight. And I happen to know by looking at the plans that this is a very simple airplane to rig. In other words, everything is kind of at right angles. There's no slant, there's no cant. It's all basically right angles. So these struts, as long as I make them, vertical via the Mark I eyeball, and make sure, and I did actually kind of made sure that they were looking vertical. Not perfectly, but pretty good. It's fine. And all I'm doing is making sure that everything is connecting and pushing all the way down and connecting with the bottom of the strut. Again, not worrying where the nacelle is. So the nacelle will slide up and down until we're ready to anchor it. And now you can't see, but I'm looking at it on front, making sure that nothing is leaning. In this case, I had to push it over just a little bit. And then once I'm sure that it's square in all locations, top, bottom, front, back, side, and it's pretty dang good. And I haven't checked the top wing, but I'm pretty dang confident that as long as it's square here, it's going to be square up there. I'm gonna be okay. I'll be able to, even if I have to adjust a couple holes, they'll be fine up the top. But there it is, one side done. It was as simple as that. I couldn't believe how easy it was. Those nacelles are helpful because they are holding it in place. Don't know if that's how most people would do it, but it's the way I'm doing it. Add a little of my accelerator to zap those little suckers in place, and those struts are in. And again, they're the same distance at the bottom as they are at the top in terms of the distance apart. They should, by all that's right and holy, fit into the holes on the underside of the top center section when I'm ready. So that's amazing. So I do the same thing for the other side. Nothing amazing really. This time I just made sure that they fit because I wanted to. This side I was a little more worried about. And they'd all fit a long time ago, but this is also the first time I put these nacelle struts on since multiple weeks ago when I started this thing. Making sure they're all going to fit into their holes. They're relatively tight. And just individually put each one in, and you can sort of nudge them over and grab them at the base, for example, in some cases, and punch them into the hole. But there it is. They all fit into their little respective holes. They'll go down all the way. If they didn't, I would drill them out a little, but I did all that previously. So same thing again. This is repetitive, but it's still kind of good to show. Adding, in my case, super glue, the thick super glue on the wires, and then carefully putting them back in. Making sure I don't put glue on that window that I've made with my little ribs. So what you do is you put these into these holes again, and just kind of as you push down, like that one I tried to put in, but it was sliding up, so I started on a different side. And I'm holding, I hold on the top, for example, or squeeze them a little bit so you can actually get them into the holes. And once you start getting a couple in the holes, then you just put the other two in. And you just make sure they are pushed all the way down. If they're all the way down, then they are correct. If they're flush to the top of the wing, upper surface of the wing there, and you just make sure everything is nice and tight. One of them didn't go down quite. It's got like about I don't know, a 72nd of an inch or something like that. It's proud. It's a little high, but not worried about it yet. I'm not gonna lose sleep over it. That one there, I couldn't really get it down into the hole. I could when I didn't have glue on it, but now it's sort of start to stick. But it's going to be okay. Doing the same thing, using the other side, I'm sighting down the other nacelle and those struts to make sure that it's vertical and they look the same. Making sure it's not diagonal, canted down, crooked, whatever. Making sure each end looks good. And once I've got it nice, and I'm making sure again that at the base, those struts are flush right up to the upper surface of the lower wing. And I'm, at this point, I'm sort of can't believe it. Here I take some tweezers and I try to push this one strut down a little bit. I was unable to get it any closer, and I thought, just leave it alone, fool. It's going to be okay. So, a little dab of my zip kicker around these holes, just to make sure that they dry. This thing's going to be a beast, but it's going to be very strong once all together. It's amazing how tough this airplane must have been. And that's what's neat about these paper models. You put them together like the real thing. And dang, the people said they were fabric and baling wire and all this kind of nonsense. These things were, space shuttles of their day. They were very well engineered, and they were tough beasts, very strong. So what I'm going to do, I think now, is rig these up a little bit, not glue the nacelles in yet, rig them up a little where they're supposed to be. Or maybe put the nacelles on, because now that I have the struts on there square, I can shimmy this nacelle to where it's supposed to go. There's a couple dotted lines on the struts to give you an idea. So I can get them where I need them. There's also a strut that will help align the nacelles. Maybe I'll do that next. Then once the nacelles are aligned, then I'm going to rig this up a little bit as it sits, so that then it's all ready to just try to pop that top wing on, that center section. Because then the only other kind of really painful thing is putting on the outside panels, which I think are going to probably require wires and or some kind of tab in there. I'm not sure, but man, this was a very productive day.